Welcome to the table. Here at Realms of Adventure, I'd like to have a little bit of a preamble regarding objectionable content, particularly at the table and here on the channel. Typically, we would do a session 0. And the point of that is to check in, establish a baseline, and avoid future issues. We'd like to take an opportunity to find out what types of contents we want to allow in our game and which topics we would prefer to avoid. Because the story unfolds in real time, it's essential that we discuss these topics before the game starts. These discussions are intended to keep each of us safe and comfortable at the table, and so it's not okay to ask why somebody wants some type of content banned. If someone wants it banned, we ban it, no questions asked. The Realms of Adventure setting leans towards a grittier style of D&D where the bad guys do bad things. The choices are often simply shades of gray rather than black and white. Violence and cruelty are things that happen in the realms, and the peoples of those realms are most often in conflict for land, resources, and control. However, we can set limits to how graphically these elements get portrayed and described at the table. We need to discuss at a minimum what constitutes objectionable content and respecting our host, the environment, and those around us who might be outside of our game. If we're playing in public, that needs to be at the forefront of our minds. We need to think about what's the limit on how graphically any of these game concepts should be described. Can players swear at the table? Does anyone have phobias that they don't want to appear in the game? Like, I don't know, spiders or, body horror. What are going to be our lines and veils? I mean, where do we draw hard lines that we're not going to cross? And what do we draw a veil over and just fade to black like an old movie? We should just establish an X card as a safety tool. One variant of the X card is to simply draw an X on a card and place it on the table at the start of the session. And then any player can silently reject content they find upsetting by tapping the X card or pointing to it. Whoever's speaking then rewinds a bit and continues on, excising the objectable content. There's no questions asked, no judgment, and no arguing when someone invokes the X card. You can, however, ask for clarification if you need it, such as, how far back should I rewind this? If some groups insist on making an X with their hands, we could do that if you prefer, or just simply saying, let's X that out. Something. We should have a method. As a general baseline, we would all love to assume that general societal mores will keep the most objectionable content and uncomfortable topics out of the game. But that approach relies on shared assumptions that aren't always accurate. Here, I'm going to present a set of basic assumptions for the group, which we can modify during our sessions and our discussions. This is Dungeons and Dragons. This is fantasy role-playing. Bloodshed, injuries, and even dismemberment will most likely be described. I mean, this is D&D. There's a fair bit of combat. However, excessive descriptions of gore and cruelty, we want to avoid that. Romantic and sexual relationships can happen in the game, but the players should avoid being overly suggestive. Sex is going to always happen off screen because we're in public and it makes me uncomfortable. I don't want to be describing that. Because attempts at initiating a relationship between player characters can be uncomfortable, it's too much like one player hitting on another. We're going to want to avoid that. Let's avoid excessively gross or scatological descriptions. No one will be allowed to deliberately push the boundaries that we're establishing, or try to find loopholes, or try to renegotiate the limits, or belittle people for having a different tolerance to objectionable content. We're not going to allow that. The X card goes into effect immediately if someone becomes uncomfortable about content. Even if it wasn't already banned in a prior discussion, we don't want to upset anyone. Once somebody indicates the X card, we back off. And then once the issue is resolved, we move on with the game. There's a couple of things that this should be the baseline. Nobody should have a question about this, but the following acts should never be performed by player characters. Torture, we're not doing that. Rape or non-consensual sexual contact or sexual threats, we're not doing that. Harm to children, including sexual abuse, we're not doing that. Reprehensible uses of mind control magic, no. Owning slaves or profiting from the slave trade, no. There may be slavery, there may be rape, there may be all sorts of horrors and terrors in this game, but those are the things that the player characters are fighting against. The player characters are going to be the heroes. This is their story. End of discussion.